Put your hands on top of your head.
Well, I didn't.
Now!
Here comes the jam. Getting down with the truth. The only way he knows how to. Girls all up with his name. We call him the chief. The chief. You're damn right. He's gonna get that sucker. Gonna track down the truth. You know what a track down the truth. You know what a they call him. We call him the chief. The chief. You're damn right we do.
Bet your mother had a loud bark.
Good morning. This is Morning Coffee with the Chief. I'm your host, Patrick Jordan, here on YouTube's Pop Culture Minefield. You can also find us on Rumble and on Pop Culture Minefield's Facebook page and their Twitter feed. You can find me on Twitter at Elias D. Jordan. I do a show on KJDB.com. I do a show called Briefing with the Chief, in which I go over politics, public policy, and what's in the news. I got a great show coming up tomorrow. I'm going to have a couple of people who are running for office. I have somebody who worked for the LA County Sheriff's Department, my alma mater, who's going to be on, Sharon Ransom. She's running for judge. She was a dispatcher for 17 years. So if you're up for it, listen to the show and you'll hear this lady who worked her way up all the way from being a dispatcher on the Sheriff's Department to the District Attorney's Office. Now she's running for judge and she's looking pretty good. So I'll have her on, and I'll have a former deputy sheriff, also from my department, who is running for the assembly, and he's in a tight race, and that's he's running as a Republican. So to even be in a tight race at a Republican in LA County means he's doing pretty good. I'll have him on, and we'll talk about what's going on in California, particularly in the assembly. Now, I just got back from Scotland. I have to tell you, I had a great time in Scotland. Me and my wife go to Europe usually once a year. And this time we did the northern part of England, Newcastle. Of course, I had a beer. And when we were in Newcastle, I bring this up because there was a little bit of Hollywood throughout our trip. We went to the city of Durham. Now, the city of Durham, the castle there, which was closed, unfortunately, is where they filmed parts of Harry Potter. We also went into the cathedral right next door. It was beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And then later on in our trip, and we went on to Edinburgh, and then after Edinburgh, in Edinburgh, we went, actually, after Edinburgh, we went on to Glasgow, Scotland. Now, Edinburgh was beautiful, the old city, the castles that they had there. Holyrood, castle is the favorite of the late Queen Elizabeth. She loved that place. We toured that place. It was very nice. They shut it down the next day because the king was in town visiting his castle, because it still operates as a castle for the royal family. But after that, we went to Glasgow. I went to the museum for the oldest law enforcement agency in England, and it was actually Glasgow. And Sir Robert Peel kind of started it there, then it expanded to London. So it was kind of interesting to go through that old museum and see some of the old coppers there who were staffing it. And I saw one of our patches from my LA County Sheriff's Department there displayed prominently at the museum. And but we also went to the city of Stirling. Now, if you guys love the movie Braveheart, that is where William Wallace, and of course Mel Gibson playing William Wallace, beat the English in the Battle of Stirling Bridge. So it was a fantastic trip, a lot of castles, a lot of cathedrals and churches, and just a lot of great history. I wouldn't say the food was the best. It was okay. I tried I had haggis, which was okay. Wasn't bad. And of course, I had to go tour a whiskey distillery. So I had some whiskey in Glasgow. They had the only distillery still left in Glasgow. And of course, had to taste some of that. But it was a great trip, and I'm glad to be back. Unfortunately, you guys had to endure some repeats over the time. But before we get into our show today is going to be the movie. We're going to review the movie Colors, which is there are a handful of movies that really display the violence of the 80s and particularly the 90s after crack hit the streets, 80s and 90s, involving the street gangs, the Bloods and Crips and Latinos, and how they all intersected at the time, and the level of violence that existed back at the time. And it starts Sean Penn and Robert Duvall. But before we get into that, I need to make a plug for the LA Mission. It's been 3 weeks, and the LA Mission is coming up on its holiday season. They do a big Thanksgiving, and they count on donations for the public to put on their full course meal for the men and women and children who are living on Skid Row. And it's interesting. I've been plugging the Los Angeles Mission for a long time. I've been on their board for a long time, and you can find the Los Angeles Mission at losangelesmission.org and make a donation. But recently, the Supreme Court said you can start enforcing camping laws around the country. Now, we've been on hold here and on the West Coast. Actually, it's the Ninth Circuit Court here has said that you couldn't enforce camping unless there was available housing for the homeless. And the Supreme Court said, no, you can enforce camping just recently. And now the governor's come down and he's pushing people to forcing anti-camping and to break up the homeless encampments, and he's tying money to it. I mean, after billions spent with failure under these guys, now they're wanting, okay, well, let's use the law, right? They've completely switched and they've switched mostly because there's political liability related to it. But regardless of whether you can enforce law on camping or not, the Los Angeles Mission has been there doing their job. They've been doing outreach not only to bring people into the mission for basic services, but also to give them extended services, 6 months to 12 months to help them recover and re-enter back in society. Thanksgiving is coming up. Christmas is coming up. Those are big events for them. Please pull up the losangelesmission.org and make a donation today. Okay. So I'm back. I just was talking to my guest. He just got back from Europe as well. He went to Turkey, which is, I'll have to ask him about that offline. But let's bring on our guest. And I only have one guest today. The other guest had to bug out. He had some personal family issues he needed to deal with. But my guest today is retired sergeant from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. He's been on the show before. His name is Scott Orr. Hey, Scott, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I heard you no longer trailer trash in Tennessee now that now you have a house. Is that true?
Now we got a house.
So I was actually listening to a show. I don't know if you guys got hit by the hurricane at all, or if you felt any of the effects of it, but what is going on in North Carolina, it's just devastating. And that's actually your neck of the woods. You're probably a few hundred miles away from that, but just devastating what's going on in North Carolina. And it's frustrating to hear that FEMA is slow to handle that, which is really frustrating. But welcome to the show, Scott. And we're going to talk about the movie Colors. So what'd you think of the movie?
Oh, I've seen it numerous times. I enjoyed it. It working gangs for 10 years. It was. There's, of course it's Hollywood, so there's a lot of stuff that's been Hollywoodized, or however you want to say it, but dramatic effect, I guess. But it's pretty. We didn't really work a lot with Crash, and then Crash went through their own little thing.
Yeah.
So we didn't work a lot with Crash, but we had GET. I was on GET, which was the gang enforcement team. I was on that for 2 years. And then I got promoted to OSS, being a detective, which pretty much is, the green jackets, wearing Levi's and a green jacket and your gun belt, and going out and working cases and stopping gangsters. But I would say the sheriff's department, for the most part, the guys I worked around were more like Robert Duvall than they were Sean Penn.
Yeah. Well, the softer approach in talking to folks was, that was more productive. That's my opinion. I freely admit I wasn't a gang expert, and when I did interact with them, I was the same when I talked to them as I was with, grandma who was calling about a burglary, right? You just obviously you're a little more on guard when you're dealing with gangsters, but and I always felt they appreciated just being talked to straight. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like like if you caught them with weed, you would just, you'd give it back to them. And I mean, because weed was, back then it was a misdemeanor, but unless the guy was a real jerk, you'd never arrest somebody for marijuana. And being a product of the 70s, I would tell him, dude, you got ripped off. This is some junk weed you just bought. You need to go back to the guy dealing it and tell him to give you the good stuff like that. But some guys would get we're going to hook him he's a gangster. Well, just write a field identification card that you stopped him and put it in the system. I mean, my biggest way you'd mess with them is tow their car.
Yeah, take the right away, right?
Yeah, that was always the threat. Dude, you better talk to me or I'm just going to tow your car.
And they did talk, right? I mean, but let me introduce the movie a little bit, and then I'll get a little bit into your background so people know how it relates to the movie as well. So, Colors was released in 1988. It's American police procedural action crime film. I never heard of that procedural being described as that. It's starring Sean Penn and Robert Duvall. And Robert Duvall, I love. He's a great actor. I wouldn't say Sean Penn's a great actor as well, but I wouldn't say I'm as enamored with him. And it was directed by Dennis Hopper. Who knew? I didn't know that he had directed
I didn't know
the
that
movie.
either.
And the movie was the movie music. The music for the movie was all by Herbie Hancock. I didn't know that either. That was
really? Even the Colors song?
It says that music by Herbie Hancock. So I'm assuming it's all by him. I didn't know that. I saw that in the credits as it opened up. And it talks about a couple of law enforcement officers for LAPD. It's Uncle Bob Hodges, and that's Duvall, and then and Danny McGavin, and that's Sean Penn, and they work for Crash. Now, this in 88, this was just at the beginning, at least as I recall, of the crack epidemic. And just to be clear, I joined the sheriff's department in 83. I started working the streets in 85, but I wasn't working a gang area. I was working West Hollywood. I mean, surprisingly, we had some gangsters come there. They were on the down low.
Yeah.
They liked the guys that looked that, they were essentially gay or bisexual, but you can't do that in a gang area. At least at the time you couldn't. But for the most part, we didn't get a lot of gangsters running through town unless they were coming to do robberies. We got a lot of that. They were doing street robberies in West Hollywood. But we didn't have the drive-bys and things like that are portrayed in the film. And eventually I worked over at Carson Station, which was where part of this film was shot. And I got there, I think, in 84. I think the spring of 84. And so during the whole time frame of this movie, and I had been working the streets, and before crack became a big deal, and exploded in the late 80s, early 90s. I had worked the whole time, and I saw the difference from powder cocaine to crack. But the movie talks a lot about that, and it talks about the explosion of gangs related to crack. So give a little bit of your history so the audience knows when you started working street.
Can I just have a sec to answer the door?
Okay, yeah, go ahead. Okay.
Sorry.
Well, we'll have to do some filler. Oh, I was going to have a second guest, Ralph Ornelas, but he had to bug out, and Ralph was actually at the station where they filmed this movie, but he couldn't participate today because he had some family stuff come up. He sent me some stories that I'm probably going to tell here during the show here. The thing about it is I just can't do justice to Ralph's stories like he can. He's got the gift of gab, but he had to drop out. And I'm sorry, Scott, you want to deal with whoever you got to deal with or what?
No, we're good. They're in.
They're in and they're working. Okay. All right. So give me a little bit of your history, Scott. When did you join the department? When did you hit the streets, and how does that relate to the themes in the movie?
Well, I joined in 88, worked the jails, which was always a good time. Then I went to Carson in 1990. And then I worked most predominantly on the overlap shift, which was 6 to 2 in the morning, and then mostly early mornings, which was usually 10 to 6, 10 at night till 6 in the morning. we called it early mornings. A lot of places call it graveyards, but it was
Yeah.
considered the first shift of the day. So they called it early mornings. Did 5 years there. Went to Get after several run-ins with the captain of Carson. I was shown the door basically. So I went to Get. A sergeant named Bruce Jaquez got me to Get. And worked Get for 2 years, which is a gang enforcement team, which is basically kind of like the beginning of the movie where you're in uniform and you just drive around, and your whole job is to contact gang members and try to take them to jail to get them into the gang system, whatever way you could. And then after 2 years of that, I got promoted to detective, which is the Operation Safe Streets, which is Get works for Operation Safe Streets. It's the same unit. But that's where at the one point they had the sergeant from the LA County Sheriff's helping them, where he's wearing the green jacket and the Levi's and a gun belt. And you go around in an unmarked car and work your cases, which we were always behind with areas I worked. I went to Century Station, which is where it didn't have Watts, but it did. We were around the Watts Towers. It's all commingled in there. It's
Right.
part Sheriff's Department. You can go one block and be in LAPD area. You can go in the next block, you're in Compton. You go the next block, you're in the Sheriff's Department. So you just roam around everywhere. And all the gangs, doesn't matter to them what street. It just depends on what street you're on. So I worked mostly that area until 2000. I worked 97 to 2000 in that area. Firestone, Watts, it used to be called South Central LA, but after the riots, it was changed to South LA.
Yeah.
And then worked that area from 97 to 2000. And then I went from there to Compton. When Compton started, they sent me and another detective, Chief Burson, retired Chief Burson. They sent the two of us to Compton Station when they were Compton PD was disbanding and turning to the Sheriff's Department. They sent me and Matt down there to start the OSS team. Well, we had nothing. So we would go to Century Station or Carson Station and find stuff that wasn't tied down basically and take them to Compton. So we got our desks out of the back lot of Century Station. So they were put out there for some reason, and we were able to. And then of course we're the only two Sheriff's Department members working inside Compton Station while they still have the police department. So we never did get a very warm welcome.
Right.
And then we inherited all these. I mean, they had those U.S. Post Office boxes just stacked with cases that had never been investigated, had never been entered into the gang system. So then they gave us a secretary to come down and start entering the information for us. And then finally at first they started sending detectives from other places who were not happy.
Yeah.
Because you're getting, 10, 15 cases a day and you could barely stay afloat. So you just throw all your stuff in a bag and get out in your car and go file your cases and then roam around looking for witnesses or victims and then stopping gangsters. But we weren't, I wouldn't say we were as hands-on as they were in the movie. We didn't.
Well, so let's
okay. So throwing them on the hoods and.
So, I mean, yeah, I ended up in Compton when we took over from their police department for at least 4 months, and I managed to escape. But yeah, you're right. We didn't have any resources. There didn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. But what I noticed is it was incredibly violent at the time. We had managed to lower crime in a lot of areas around Compton, but Compton, it was still going off. And so it explains it to me. And now I understand if they weren't really investigating their crimes, then obviously these bad guys are never going to jail. But as it relates to the movie, so we're talking Bloods and Crips, right? That's what you see that in here. You see you can start rolling that. And just to clarify the audience, we're going to just roll the movie. We're not going to do clips. We're just going to roll the movie, and then we'll just talk about specific scenes. I did use a edited version of colors that I found free on YouTube, and this version will be the one that's not edited, but that's what's going on. So LA, it is a mosaic down there in South LA, between LA County Sheriff's Department and LAPD jurisdictions, and there was a unit called Crash. It was the Community Resource Against Street Hoodlums. I don't think that could ever be called that these days. Now it's too hardcore, right? And it was after the Rampart scandal they got rid of Crash, right? Because they didn't have good systems in place to stop. Well, although I felt the Rampart scandal was a mile wide but only an inch deep, meaning it really didn't live up to the hype of the media as being as bad as, I mean, they did have some bad guys in there, Rafael Perez and some other stuff, but it didn't infect all of Crash, but they got rid of Crash as a result. You kind of agree with that?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think that's, I believe what you're saying, is not all of Crash was that way. I mean, we did work with them every so often, but not like in the movies where there was always a sheriff's guy with them, or when they're doing warrants and stuff like that. But yeah, I think it was one of those things where the media just painted everything with a broad brush and didn't care about the facts.
No, because it served a purpose. But the opening scene, they do talk about Crash was disbanded, but they had OSS, Operation Straight Sheets, and they did talk about both agencies, which surprised me because many times these movies will focus on one. But they actually, even though this is the two main characters were LAPD, they did throw a lot of kudos and a lot of credit to the sheriff's department's efforts to deal with gang, and really emphasized that it was just as capable and just as robust as Crash, if not more capable in my mind. But I came with that. But they did say they have 60 to 70,000 gang members. This is 1987 is what they said. And they had 387 gang murders. That doesn't include all the other murders that were going on in LA County.
No.
So gang murders were off the hook back then, and people seem to forget that. And the movie Colors, I think, Menace to Society, they kind of show that level of violence that was going on at the time that somehow the media seems to have forgotten today as we deal with crime today. Why did we do all the things that we did is because violence was off the hook back then. And I think the movie Colors emphasizes just how bad it was, particularly as crack hit those streets, right?
Right.
So one of the things I want to talk about is, can you talk about the intersection of crack and the gangs, how it fueled the explosion of gangs? Is that something you're up to talk about?
Yeah. Crack was easy to, like, I had a case where we knew this guy was dealing crack. So we hit his house and they were making it on the stove in the kitchen. I mean, that's how easy it was to make. You could just boil off the impurities and mix in what you're going to mix in with it, and you boil it off, and then it turns into a paste. You kind of let it dry, and then it turns into a rock cocaine, and you could make it in a kitchen. So when we hit the house, there was 2 pans with about, I'd say, 1 inch to 2 inches of crack that they hadn't broken up yet in the bottom of a regular saucepan that you would buy at Walmart or whatever. So it was very easy to make. It was very cheap to make. So, they could sell it because powdered cocaine was too expensive down in the ghetto. I mean, that was considered a rich people's drug. But crack changed the whole, you could get for $20, you could get a good rock of cocaine for that.
And that gave them a money source, and that gave them ways to buy cars and buy guns, and then there became a fight for turf, right? That's a big part of what happened in the 80s and 90s, is fighting for turf to sell drugs, right?
Oh yeah, it was all drug in the black neighborhoods. It was all drug. It was all drug related. But you'd have, like in the movie, you'd have one day you'd stop a guy and he's a blood, and the next day he's overselling crack in a Crip area, but you would never find that. You would never find that in a barrio or Mexican gang area. they were true to their neighborhood, more or less. They did deal their drugs and the marijuana and stuff like that. But down in the predominantly African-American neighborhoods, it was crack cocaine was the number one draw.
Yeah, and I think I need to explain, folks. So powder cocaine, which is something that I had more experience with at work, arresting people. It was people with the Sunset Strip to play around, right? So they went and it were people who had money, so they had powder cocaine, and you snort powder cocaine. And why powder cocaine, though, snorting it is not the most efficient way to take drugs because the particulate matter goes in your lungs, then it's got to dissolve and go into your bloodstream. And so it's not efficient, right? And when they started rocking up crack or cocaine, what that meant is you could take that gram and make a few rocks out of it. Now you can sell those rocks for $10 or $20, but you can smoke it this time. Now, smoking crack is way more efficient in ingesting it. And so you get this intense high. It might not last for as long as maybe powder cocaine, but it'll be more intense than powder cocaine. And some of you folks who practitioned this or used it, you probably know what I'm talking about. And once it became a poor man's drug, it became open for black gangs to sell. But not only that, the usage within the working class neighborhoods, white, black, Latino, you name it, skyrocketed. And so you had addicts who were ripping people off to support their habit, and you had gangsters who were engaged in this drug warfare, including drive-bys to control the turf. Does that kind of lay it out in your mind, Scott?
Yeah, it was all about it's all about basically who can control the money.
Yeah, it was about the money. Hey, bring that comment back up. Here we go. The cops being hard on gangsters in LA caused the trickle effect, which made other cops across the country feel free, according to I don't know about that. It's remember, the portrayal of cops on TV is way different than actually what happens in the streets. You get a lot more love with Sugar than you do with the Switch, and we'll let Scott. He worked with the gangs. You wanted to talk to these guys on their same level, right? I mean, not on the same level, but you wanted to talk to these guys and get them to open up. And you get more people opening up when you talk to them professionally than you do, like, say, Pac-Man in this movie, right? So Sean Penn's character.
I looked at Pac-Man as kind of a caricature. I mean,
yeah,
you weren't going to get any information if you acted like him. You could try to intimidate them, but they're used to being they're used to intimidate. They're the ones that usually are intimidating other people. So they're used to people trying to intimidate them. So like most of our approach was, we would just talk to them. Like I said earlier when we were talking, the gang detectives weren't looking. We didn't necessarily want them to take them to jail for crack. We didn't want to necessarily, we'd take them to jail for guns, but you had to be firm but fair. But if you talk to them, like if they knew you were just, like for instance, when we were working Compton, I had a lot of informants in the different gangs in Compton, and they were my informants because, like one, I'd bring diapers every week, pack of diapers, tell me everything I wanted to know. Because then he'd go home with the diapers and his girlfriend would think he's just the greatest thing since sliced bread. And he told me one time, he says, yeah, we saw one of your gang cars coming down the street and we were going to light it up. Then we realized it was you and your partner, so we didn't shoot.
Yeah.
So
the comment, so what you see in the movie, isn't exactly true. So also the best crackhead customers are white. Yeah, yes. When I said poor working class neighborhoods, also wealthy people started using crack because it's cheaper, and you get a higher high, right? And you get, incredibly, it's more addictive. The problem with, as we, hear this drama where they talk about, they increased the sentences on crack cocaine, federal sentences versus powder, and that's discriminatory. No, the violence was out of control in the black communities. That's why you had this disparate sentencing for crack cocaine, and that was driven by gang violence and fighting over turf. That's why we had that, and now it gets spun as, no, it's just a new way of systemic racism against the black man, and that's not true. People were begging for us to do something about it in those communities. But here's the interplay between Robert Duvall character and Sean Penn, and I think they both did a pretty good job in displaying what they were trying to do. So Duvall he's the old veteran who's acting like you're talking about. Hey, get a lot more love with sugar, a lot more information just by being okay. And then you got Sean Penn, who, as you said, he's a caricature, but he plays the I know what I'm doing, don't tell me what to do. I have to tell you, somebody like him would not, in my mind, would not have lasted very long, in my impression, at an OSS or a GET or even in Crash. He'd have been bounced pretty quickly. Because that isn't the formula that got success, right?
Yeah, he would have, nobody would want to work with him.
Yeah. And later on in the movie, he gets targeted, right? That does happen, but it's I don't know. I didn't like Sean Penn's character in this just because it really didn't portray what happens with law enforcement totally. But obviously they're selling a movie, and he creates great conflict between law enforcement and the gangsters, and he's kind of
and his partner.
And his part, well, and he gives, because he's so over the top, it actually, some sympathy is put on these thugs. But in reality, these thugs are selling poison in their communities. They're engaging in drive-bys to take out their competition, and they don't care who gets hurt as long as they get bucks. That's what I saw what was going on in the late 80s, early 90s as it relates to crack cocaine in the black communities. It was all about the dollar, and they didn't care who got hurt. Am I accurate? Am I accurate on that? Or
yeah, that was the whole scourge of the community down in that area. But it's it's easy to direct the blame on the cops or politicians, but the guy dealing crack lives in your neighborhood.
Yeah.
And you don't, to me, that was the hardest thing for me to get around when I worked down there, was that you'd have these drive-by shootings, and they all know who did it.
Yeah.
They'd have, these turf wars over, and it wasn't like you say turf war and people think you're battling over a certain area. Well, you're battling over who gets to sell what coke, who gets to sell the coke or the drugs on what street. That's what the whole battle is that my gang wants to sell drugs here, and that gang's already got control, and they're making a lot more money on that street than I'm making on this street. So now we want to take that street and push them to a different street. But it was hard for me at first, because I grew up in a small town in where you had marijuana, and yeah, I'm sure there was hard drugs, but there was never a race thing going on, because everybody worked in the same business. Everybody worked for a shipyard, so everybody knew everybody. So to me, and then when you grew up, your neighborhood was your neighborhood, kind of like the Hispanic gangs. That's our neighborhood. We're we're not going to let somebody sell dope in our neighborhood. We'll take action ourselves. So it was hard for me to go there and then see that the guy causing all the problems in your neighborhood, the drive-bys where he never gets hit, but all the innocent people do get hit, and everybody's upset. Like in one scene, they're screaming at the cops, and it's like, the person selling the drugs on the street, but you're okay with them doing that, and that's why all this violence has come to your neighborhood. And you're okay with that, but because the cops don't catch him or stop it, then you're mad. Like that community, that one scene with the community. And it's like, who's doing this.
Yes.
And a lot of times it's your kids.
Exactly. And I think we had a comment, drugs know no race. That is absolutely true. And that is really prevalent today in terms of fentanyl. Fentanyl, it knows no race, no class, no gender, no color, you name it. Everybody's dying because of fentanyl overdose. But let's talk about the first drive-by. And because drive-bys at the time were the way of enforcement, right? It was just one of those things. And just explain a drive-by. I mean, they show it in the movie that I think it's Rocket does a drive-by, right? Just give me a drive-by that you investigated. What happened? What was it about?
Geez, I had so many. Um, one was when I was working in patrol, and it was the north end of the Carson's area, which was predominantly African American neighborhood. And the call came out, shots fired, shots fired. And I actually had my brother-in-law on a ride-along who was in the Army at the time. And so I was the closest unit, even though it was a county area, and I was a city car. And to our captain at the time, that was a big no-no. But I was the closest, and there was no cars in that area, so I told him I was responding. Well, when I got there, of course, everybody's gathered around, everybody's crying, and one of the gang members of that area had I think, a month-old baby in his arms. Car rolls by, lights up the house with an AK-47, hits the baby, goes through the baby, hits the dad in the chest. Of course, the baby passed away, and the dad ended up surviving. And I mean, it's total chaos when you get there. And you're trying to get people, to move out of the way because fire's on the way. And it's just, and then, I'm the only guy there. So I put out, for assistance. And the funny thing is LAPD was the first one to show up because we bordered their area at that time. They were the first one to show up for my assistance because the unit that was working had a scanner in their car because, I don't think we still can talk to LAPD. I don't know if we can, that's ever changed. But back then you couldn't talk to LAPD unless you were standing next to an LAPD officer who would relay what you wanted said. So he had a scanner and they showed up and started getting the crowd away. And then our units all showed up, and a unit from, I think, Firestone showed up because we were on the same frequency. At that time, Firestone's still out of station, but.
But the drive-bys were indiscriminate, right?
Oh, they just go by and start shooting. They didn't. There was no. It wasn't like a sniper where they target a single guy. They would just drive by and put as many bullets downrange as they possibly could into whatever structure, a backyard, or stuff like that. That's like I always said. If I lived in one of those neighborhoods, the last place I would be is my front porch.
Which is the place they probably hung out on, right?
Right. That's where they hung out all the time. So, it wouldn't be strange. I had one drive-by where they were shooting at the gangster's house, but they killed 2 people in the house next door because they just kept shooting as they drove along.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So they do a drive-by, and they do a drive-by with, let's say an AK-47. So what does an AK-47 do when it hits stucco and drywall?
Goes right through it.
Right. And right. And so these folks, when they hear gunfire, they get on the ground. That's what happened. That's what was going on in the 80s and 90s. And I think Colors does portray that. I mean, they got 2 drive-bys in this shooting, and then in this movie, and then they have what I call a walk-up, which we'll get into later. But and it's the indiscriminate shooting that led to the high level of violence that caused law enforcement to get much more aggressive to dealing with what was going on in these communities at the insistence of community leaders. Can you talk a little bit about that? Community leaders, as you were working these streets, they wanted you to solve these problems. They wanted you to take these folks off the streets, right?
Oh yeah. I went to a community meetings several times with the captain of Compton Station, and we went twice there with the Catholic Church, but it wasn't was more of a meeting place. It wasn't there for, it wasn't, for Catholics. It was just a community meeting in there. And people were very upset. And I told them, and the captain's just taking all kinds of heat because it was kind of like what they portrayed in the movie. They're yelling at the captain about, what are you doing? What are you doing? And what are you doing? And then he's kind of looking at me like, and it was looking at me like, can I? And so then he goes, well, I'll let you talk to the detective, which I was the acting sergeant at the time. And I just told him, look, we're doing the best job we can, but we're not getting any help out of you. You want the neighborhood to change, but you're not willing to step up to help change it. You want us to take care of your problems. But every one of you that knows who the problem is on your street. I said, start calling the sheriff's department. Every time they're hanging out there, just tell the dispatcher that they're doing something suspicious. Because that way, when the cops get there, there's a reason for them to get out of the car and investigate. But if you don't call, we don't come, because there's too much going on in this city to have a cop on every corner. Plus, the city, county, nobody will pay for that, to have a cop on every corner. So
this part of the movie, they're showing the funeral. So let's back up a little bit. So they've and you said it. They had a community meeting regarding the violence. You saw that in the movie, exactly what you're talking about. But also, you guys had to deploy, and it's portrayed in this movie because there's retaliation going on at funerals, right? So they show a funeral getting shot up. That was, I can't remember a funeral actually getting shot up, but I know they were threatened to get shot up. Do you have? So this is accurate what they're portraying in the film, right?
Yes, I like his comment that nobody snitches in the hood.
Yeah,
that's so you can believe that all you want. Anyway, how do you think we solved most of our murders? Because we had snitches in the hood. That whole where he says, well, you owe me one. That happened all the time.
Yeah.
Like I was saying earlier, hey, I know so-and-so did the shooting. Who is he with? Oh, I don't know, man. You better tell me I'm towing your car because you don't have a driver's license. Okay, they'll tell you who did it because they're snitching all the time. So that whole snitches don't in the hood. He goes, that's so wrong. That's not true at all. That's where we get most of our information.
Well, it depends on how you work. I think, I'm curious because I do it. On my other show, Briefing with the Chief, I do connect with some folks from Chicago, and they seem like they just don't have that. They don't have those inroads into the gangs in Chicago. So I'm curious if they use the same approach that we've used out here in LA, in Chicago, and I suspect maybe they don't, because
I did a ride along with them in Chicago.
What'd you think? Did they use some of the same tactics, or was there a difference?
They were more like Sean Penn.
Ah. Yeah, that's what I suspect, because if you take the softer, because I think, I don't want to say gangsters have a conscience, but some of these folks, I mean, they just grow up in circumstances that aren't good, and they go with the flow, but ultimately they know it's bad, and so they do speak up. And yes, Tom Baker, I do like the Blue Knight. We did that show on Morning Coffee with the Chief. It's a great movie. But these drive-bys were a big part of why we flooded those areas and expanded our gang units, and started gathering gang intelligence so we can solve a lot of these crimes, right? And right now there's a push to eliminate any intelligence gatherings amongst gangsters in this Nuevo reform, the reform movement, the criminal justice reform movement. So a lot of tools that we use, they're discrediting or they're dismantling, and you're just seeing the crime going up, right? So gathering intelligence is really important, and you have to have good relationships and a gift of gab to get that intelligence, right?
Yeah, you got to be able to. My whole thing is even when I came in as a cop, I came in older. I mean, I've been played
Yeah.
football in college. Then I joined the Marine Corps for 4 years. And then I came on the sheriff's department. And so I don't know, I never felt I had anything to prove. So being a cop was kind of the last job I ever expected to take because my family wasn't big on cops. My dad was arrested on Christmas Eve. So, I mean, we were not a cop family. So becoming a cop was like my only resort when I got out of the Marine Corps because I really didn't have other skill other than, warfare. So I never took it as like a personal affront. I always look at it as a cat and mouse game, right? Sometimes the mouse gets the cheese, sometimes the cat gets the mouse. So
Right.
to me, it was more of so I never had to have I'm Billy Badass Cop and you're going to listen to what I say and, anything like that. So I was always like, hey, he's doing his thing. I'm doing mine. And as long as, I know they're up doing their crime. But if I don't catch them, I'm not going to be mad at them. So a lot of these guys took it. You worked with guys like that who took it personal, and it's like, dude, it's a game. You got to look at it as a game. And sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. Sometimes they get away with it.
It's if you don't catch them, it's not a personal loss, is the way you should look at it. I think you should be putting your best energies into solving those crimes that are murders and rapes, and some of them are serious stuff, but within the boundaries of the law. But yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think some of these guys got wrapped up in it. There was a scene early on, and I got to talk a little bit about county jail, where you see the Bloods and the Crips on either sides of the bar, and they're making all this noise, and it implied that was what was going on in the jail, and they're all in their own street clothes, and I'm like, that shit would not happen in the LA County jail system. Clearly dramatization. One, they wouldn't be wearing all those damn colors, and they would be separated because we did have separate dorms. They wouldn't be right next to each other, and that stuff wouldn't be allowed. And so they did take some artistic license to suggest things that would not be tolerated in the LA County jail systems. They would have been locked down. They wouldn't have been doing that kind of stuff at all.
Well, yeah, the Crips and the Blood modules were like on separate sides of the men's central jail. They never came in contact with each other. Even if they were going to court, they were, different. They were never available where they could throw. And if they started throwing up signs, that was not good if you're in jail to start throwing up signs, because there'd be deputies that would make sure that you didn't do that anymore.
Right. But you would get whatever they call it. They'd write you up and you get some discipline. Lose a couple of days in jail. At the time, the jail was running around 20,000, 22,000 jail system people. And, it ended up scaling all the way down to 12,000 during COVID. When I was kind of running the population, there was about 18,000. Okay, let's do the runner. I got runner and the pitch. We got to talk about runner and the pitch. So High Top is their dope dealer here, and we probably already passed this up in the movie, but they come up on him, and he takes off running. And of course, Pac-Man goes chasing after him, and Duvall stays, and he holds all the other guys where they're at. And of course, he pitches. Right, he ends up pitching. And Sean Penn, our character Pac-Man, finds it, and then of course they go to arrest him, but Duvall, he crushes the rock, let it go, it's no big deal. But he's our bad guy. So hey, one of the things that when you sometimes the DAs would say, well, they don't really pitch, do they? That you guys just write that in. No, that happens. I don't know how many times it happened to me, and I didn't work the hood. It just, the dope dealer dumps the dope because they don't want to get caught on it. Yeah, they pitch it. They try to get rid of it. Hopefully you don't see it. So yeah, they pitch it when you come up on them, right?
Oh yeah.
And you're a smart cop if you search the area after the guy leaves it, and you're going to find out it's going to be hard to pin it on him if you don't see the pitch, but that does happen, right? And
it happens all the time, but it depends on what, like at Compton court, they would never file that case.
Yeah,
because the defense attorney would just go in there and say, well, how do you know he threw that?
Yeah, you'd have to say you saw
he threw it under the car, but how did you see him throw it under the car? Well, I saw him throw it under the car. Do you know what it was? Could he have thrown paper on it? And then the judge in the prelim would say, yeah, I don't think there's enough, especially Compton court. Like
Yeah,
Norwalk Court.
they'd probably do a motion to suppress, but
Right.
then they say, hey, well, I'm giving you. Duvall says in front of all of them, I'm crushing this, and you owe me one in front of everybody. One, I have to. Okay, that would never happen where they would do it in front of everybody. That would be a side conversation between him and High Top. So, because you don't want to look like you owe a cop something, because the next time you talk to that guy, if he solves a crime, then it gets pinned on you that you actually talked to the cop. So I thought that was kind of unrealistic. I don't know.
There
What'd
was
you think?
ways to get, there was guys that, like the one scene where they're driving by and the guy's flipping you off.
Right.
It wouldn't be unheard of for a detective car or a GET car to drive by and go, hey, dude, thanks for that info. And then you just drive by, and then everybody's looking at him like, what info? And now, he's catching, because now put that seed in their head that maybe he's snitching to the cops. So there was,
Yeah.
but,
Okay. I get it. So
yeah.
that undermined, one of the things that he says when Robert Duvall crosses the rod, hey, that was a righteous collar. Now, I don't think I've ever used the word collar. I always say, hey, that's a good arrest. What are you doing? And I always think when I hear this in the movie, and it's a West Coast movie, are they pulling lingo from the East Coast? Because that's the language they use in New York. That's my
And
collar.
Chicago.
And Chicago, I don't remember that ever being used on the streets in LA. That's the collar. So just kind of something just hit me. Do you remember that being used a lot here in Los Angeles?
No, we never
At all,
used the
right?
word
So
collar. Unless we were joking around and go, you use a New York accent and go, that's a good collar there,
yeah. So
we never. I could tell you, Pat, I did ride-alongs in several big Seattle, Chicago, Phoenix, and the way Phoenix wasn't too bad. Seattle wasn't. I wouldn't work for Seattle now because you basically are just a social worker. But back then, in the 80s, and then Chicago, the people.
I think we lost you, Scott. Hey, Scott, if you can hear me, log back out and come back in, because I think we lost you. But yeah, the word. Go ahead, Martine. Hello? Maybe it's me.
Oh, he's absolutely frozen, and I had my mic closed. Boomerang. Oh, okay. So, Scott, I don't think he can hear us. Scott. Oh well. Now you're muted, Chief. Chief.
Yes.
Okay, you were muted for a second there.
Okay, so let's see if we get Scott back. Okay, so the word collar is not used very often. In fact, it's not used at all on the West Coast, and so I take issue with the writers here. Hopefully, Scott is logging out and coming back in, because he froze up. Let's see if he remembers his. Now, one of the other things that they show in the movie, and hopefully when Scott comes back, we'll talk a little bit about it, and that is the interplay between Black gangs and Latino gangs. At the time, they had very specific neighborhoods for Blacks and Latinos, but over the years, more and more Latinos are moving into the Black neighborhoods, and that created a lot of conflict as time went on between Black gangs and Latino gangs. You see some of that going on here with Frog and his gang, and they do talk about one of the oldest gangs in Los Angeles called White Fence. Now, I'm not a gang expert. Hopefully, we get Scott back and he could talk about that. But I did want to talk about that a little bit. But well, we're waiting for Scott to come back. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the stories that I got from Chief Ornelas, who was supposed to make it here, and he says, let me take you back to February of 1987 when I was an FTO on day shift. All of my trainees knew that I would run 6 miles before a shift. My trainee at the time was a guy named Tom Jordan. So he's telling me this long story. There's a reason for this. Tom was just out of the Marine Corps. Tom was game for were 6'2" and a 20-inch arm. So he was 6'2", is a big guy. Yes, a true Marine. I can't tell these stories like Ralph tells the story. When we returned in a separate shower stall, I heard ladies' voices in the bathroom area. So Carson Station had obviously a locker room for men with a shower and a locker room for women with a shower. And I remember I worked there. So as a bold Brooklyn boy Ralph is from Brooklyn, I yelled at the ladies to get out. Well, I was yelling at the ladies. I saw Dennis Hopper and Robert Duvall. So apparently they didn't realize anybody would be there. And they had some workers who were working with them doing production in the locker room. And they tell them to stand by, and they get the ladies out. And he says, as I was at my locker, Robert Duvall came up to my locker and he introduced each other. And Mr. Duvall, who was so respectful, offered me at the end of the shift to have dinner with him. So he went to dinner with him. So he enjoyed Robert Duvall. He became friends with Robert Duvall, and he went to dinner with Robert Duvall. And he talked about all of the different parts Robert Duvall played in. Now, the one I remember first was To Kill the Mockingbird, and they talk about that. And of course, he played in The Godfather. I could not wait to finish my shift so that he could go to dinner with Duvall. And they talked about all the people that Robert Duvall interacted with that Ralph was interested in. So changing gears, in preparation for the film of Colors, they had a captain, Buford Smith. Yeah, that's a real name. Came to the briefing and instructed all the deputies and professional staff not to take photos of the actors, especially Sean Penn. Yeah, he was going through that time. If you remember, he was with Madonna at the time, and he just had this attitude. I didn't like him from that. I thought he was a good actor. I saw him at the movie In Close Range and some of these other movies that I really liked. But as his career grew and he was with Madonna, it's like his head blew up to be a mile wide. So they weren't supposed to take any pictures of him. Well, that brought attention to the station. You have to understand, cops don't like to be told that they can't do something that's actually legal to do, right? Hey, what do you mean I can't do that? I'm going to do this, right? So they ignore Captain Buford Smith. And there was a lieutenant there, Steve Husk, who, when he came to the office, he was the watch commander for the day. He took a photo of Sean Penn near the back door of the station. And where the watch commander, parks his car. And Sean Penn got upset and charged at the lieutenant and went to grab him. But there was a brand new deputy at the station who used to be an NFL player, National Football League.
Oh, I see. I see where this is coming.
And so he grabs Sean Penn by the collar and kind of picks him off the street. Says, "You don't touch my lieutenant." And that ended Sean Penn's aggression. So this I've seen this guy before. The deputy. He's a pretty big guy. But that's his story. And unfortunately, I can't tell the story the same way that Ralph Ornelas tells the story, but I appreciate Ralph sending me those stories. I don't know where Scott is at. I thought he'd come right back in. Let me see if I can send him an email. I wonder if he I wonder if his the workers are causing a problem there. Okay. So we're going to move forward, and hopefully Scott will get back. And so, Martine, you want to jump in, and we're going to just move forward. And let's see here. So you saw some of these gangs. How do they compare to Venezuelan gangs?
I wouldn't know.
You wouldn't know?
No. I mean, whoa, Scott is here.
Yeah,
trying to connect. I met people of almost all walks of life. Of course, eventually you not that you look for it, but you end up meeting people who's not in the light side of the road.
Yeah,
let's put it that way. And
there, Scott is back.
Of course.
Yeah, sorry about that. Power went out for a minute.
Okay, hold on a second. Let Martin finish his thought. Then I got to ask
Oh,
you a
and
question, and we'll move forward.
yeah, the thing that most took my attention was how they referred it to their activities as the job, like going to the to the office.
Okay. No, we got a comment on the spray painting the face. First of all, let me ask the question I wanted to ask you, Ralph. I mean, not Ralph, Scott. White fence. You want to explain what the interplay between Latino gangs and black gangs then, and how it progressed as more Latinos moved into the black neighborhoods?
Yeah, the funny thing is, in Compton, the most predominant gang was a gang called Compton Barrio Trece. They were the ones that were the most active, and they basically, were families that moved into Compton, which was predominantly black, and so they started they were doing more drive-bys on black gangs because they're trying to, these black gangs could still control the areas that had Hispanic people living in them, so they were getting into the gang trade, the drug trade and stuff like that in the neighborhoods, and at the time. But once we came in there, we basically did, I don't want to scorched earth on them, but we just started writing search warrants on every one of them would start hitting their houses once or twice a month. And they ended up moving to Downey, and they ended up moving to Long Beach. And I used to go to once a month, there was a meeting of all the South Bay cities, gang units, and Long Beach was one of them. And there was a commander there, and he started going off with the sheriff's department, was pushing all the gang members down into Long Beach, and that's not the proper way to do things and stuff like that. And we're just better pest control than you are. And he said, well, what does that mean? I said, well, when I was in the Marine Corps, my first place I went, we had a duplex. So every time we let off a bomb to get rid of the cockroach or the other pest control. So all we're doing is making their life uncomfortable so they can't go around shooting people and dealing their drugs and whatever else they're into. So
Hey Scott,
that was one of the.
I'm going to stop you there. You're breaking up. Hey Scott, if you can hear me.
They're moving away from us.
Scott, you're breaking up. Martin, why don't we go ahead and take a break now, commercial break now?
Yes, I had forgot about that.
See if we get Scott to log back out and come in because he's broken up. I think he needs to work on his connection.
Yes, we will have a break of 2 minutes as usual, and we'll see you there.
Okay.
There's only one location on the internet where you can get it all: movie, TV, and comic industry. News and rumor analysis, official scoops from Geekosity magazine, reviews, and interviews. So, when you need it to be Sunday, there's only one place to go, mate. Pop Culture Minefield, where they're always talking nerdy nerd stuff. Right, jog on then. There's only one location on the internet where you can get it all. Movie, TV, and comic industry. News and rumor analysis. Official scoops from Geekosity magazine. Reviews and interviews. So, when you need it to be Sunday, there's only one place to go, mate. Pop Culture Minefield. Well, they're always talking nerdy nerd stuff. Right, jog on then.
Well, we are back, and we don't have Scott. Let's see if we can get him. Let's see, log back in. Let's try it again. Sorry about that. My first show back, and we're having some after vacation. We're having some problems. So, let me go over a little bit of stuff here that I wanted to talk about. And I think you can find it as we reviewed a bunch of movies over time where we're talking about gangsters. There's Scott. Is the dope dealer, the bad guy, the guy in the game has the money in the neighborhood. Whether we're talking the mafia, I've had Ralph Ornelas on before where we talked about the mafia. The mafia were the guys with the flashy cars and the bling and the suits, and people looked up to them for some reason. But you see this with the gangs as well, particularly black gangs, where they're the ones with the money, the cars, and the girls, and they do talk about that in the movie. And so, of course, these guys want to be part of that. You know, Scott, can you hear me? And do you want to address that part of this? That's the gangster, the dope dealer. They had the money in the neighborhood, right? And he's not there. Let's see. Scott, can you hear me? He's frozen again.
I think he's frozen again.
He's frozen again. But that was the case that in most communities, the dope dealer is the guy that had the money, had the car, and more importantly, had the girls. The guy that was going to school and getting good grades and didn't have a damn thing wasn't appealing at the time. And so a lot of guys, this was their way out, or they at least saw it as their way out in the hood. And so they got into dealing like High Top did. But also, this created a lot of conflict. I think the conflict with High Top here, and we see him fighting Pac-Man here, was he was dealing both sides. He was selling to Bloods and Crips, and that's why he got beat up in the county jail. That's what I got out of it. And he was being targeted, and he was afraid. Here he is. They're catching High Top right here. And first of all, I've never jumped over a counter to take somebody down. This was a pretty violent fight. I've been in a few of them, but nothing like this. So this was a dramatization, obviously, for the movie. And Scott just says having connection issues since power went out. Well,
yeah.
So he's try again, but yeah, Martina. So, what'd you think of this fight? This in the restaurant? I don't think I've been in some pretty tough fights, but nothing where I'm flying over countertops and onto burning stoves or anything like that. I think I was involved in a fight once in an apartment where it was one-on-one. It got pretty. The guy had white motif, and it ended up being red by the time it was done. His red, not mine. But yeah, it was but nothing like this. I mean, I would have probably had to go to the hospital with a bad back and all this other stuff. But
for a kitchen fight, there was nobody injured. To be honest, I was hoping. I was expecting more. Both of them getting more damage, cuts, burns, and all that kind of stuff. It was very mild to be taking place in a kitchen.
What you learn over time is you don't want to fight, because the more fights you get in, the more hurt you get. You can win the fight, but you're still going to the hospital. Something's going to break on you. And at least that's been my experience on nearly every single fight that I was involved in. Unless it was one of those ones you're a quick leg sweep, got them on the ground, and you handcuff. You don't really, there's not really any punching, or they're not fighting back too hard. They're just resisting.
Yeah,
But
that
these ones where they're
technically-
really resisting, it's unless you're ready for it, you're going to get hurt. I mean, I fought this one guy who's really big, but I had my baton out. I was ready, and he ended up getting the worst end of the deal out of it. But the gift of gab to talk guys down is way better.
yeah,
Here's High Top
So-
getting beat up in the county jail. Now, this is not unusual. If scores are settled in the county jail, it's one of the reasons why they were able to. You have to see the rise of the Mexican mafia. Is everybody eventually goes to jail, and ultimately, if you form a prison gang, or like the Mexican mafia or the Black Guerrilla family or some of the Aryan Brotherhood, you're going to eventually be in prison if you're in the life, and they're going to extract some level of control over you. Here's High Top. You can see clearly got his butt kicked. And it's interesting. What he said in the scene is, "I need a doctor." And the detective there, okay, yeah, we'll get to that, but you need to talk to me first. What's going on, right? And he wants some information out of him. Yeah, he wouldn't have gone right to the gang. So let's do some clarity. As soon as that happened, he'd have headed right to the infirmary, and he'd have gotten treated. He wouldn't have gone to the gang detectives. That would have happened probably the next day. So this, obviously, they're dramatizing this, and I think this portrays the cops as being bad in this situation, but that's simply not the case. But let me talk about intel in the LA County jail system. In addition to having to deal with gangs in the LA County jail system, we have a gang unit that just works the jails. And one of the things we do is we listen to the calls going in and out of the jail. So and we have people that listen to that, and we pick up intel that helps solve crimes for all kinds of agencies. In this case, they talk about, we're getting intel to help solve the drive-by that was committed by Rocket, and we're getting information, and they gave it to LAPD. That happened all the time for the LA County, because we controlled the jails. Or somebody might give you information in the jail. You might have gang units where a gang detective talking to some folks, or just talking to a regular deputy, says, I want to give some information and hopefully help their case, whatever it is going on. But we had good intelligence systems within the LA County jail system to gather information from the gangsters to help solve crimes. What is portrayed here is very realistic. That did happen. That does happen. It still happens today. And it's you'd be Pollyannish to think that the gangs don't have controls in the jail. They absolutely do. They still have I don't want to say a thriving drug trade in the jails, but they do have a drug trade going on. They have a commissary scam where they compel people to give the gangs chips and other things in those gangs, and turn around and sell them at inflated prices. That's how they get their money, and then they convert that into money on the books, and then they get it to their family, right? They pay the gangsters through gift cards to their families. So there's this whole scam going on in the jails, and it's very controlled, which is why you have to have this intelligence system within the LA County jail system. Now, one of the things I noticed, it'd be nice to have Scott back here, but one of the things I noticed this was the time when I was on the streets. When I hit the streets in '85. We were all carrying revolvers, 38s. You could upgrade to a 357, but you still had to carry 38 loads. They were hollow points. So, I mean, they could get deflected off windows, car windows, and things like that. And we were outgunned at times in a lot of situations. Now, we had shotguns, the sheriff's department did, but LAPD were limited in what they could carry. We had rifled slugs, so we had some stuff that we could fight back with. But ultimately, this rise in gang violence over drugs led to us to have to go to semi-automatics, and we went to the Beretta, which I purchased my Beretta when I retired, and I really liked my Beretta. But when I watch the movie, I see a lot of revolver still, and that's consistent with 1988 and what was going on at the time. I think we started switching over in the late 80s into the early 90s, the LA County Sheriff's Department, to semi-automatic handguns. Now, there was a scene in here about Pac-Man spraying somebody with
Bring spray paint.
spray paint. Yeah, I mean, I saw that in the movie. I wouldn't be surprised if that happened somewhere, sometime, but that was not. No, that's just they're just displaying this character, this over-the-top character of Sean Penn or Pac-Man, which is not consistent with let's see, that's what Chief
Yeah.
is telling Martine. The potato gang is the most powerful. It's because yeah, hey, in our day, yes, we did have criminal Irish gangs. I'm sure they do exist today. But I mean, who are the big gangsters in New York? O'Malley and Oni Madden, and then of course you had the Westies. So yeah, and I when I was working the streets, I always tried to put that into context, because I think we had guys working the street, and Scott talked about it. They would take it personal, and somehow these communities are different than who we are or whatever. And I always said, wait a minute, we had Jewish gangs. I mean, there's the Purple Gang in the Detroit area, the Jewish mobsters in New York. We had Italian gangs, we had Irish gangs, we had Russian organized crime now. So all of this stuff existed over time. So I don't look at like the Latino gangs or the black gangs and think that somehow there's something wrong in those things happen in all communities. And the people who suffer the most are the people that look like the gangs, right? They're the ones who are targeted the most. They're the ones who suffer the most. As you see with the drive-bys, one of the drive-bys, 2 innocent victims were killed. They were targeting, I believe, they were targeting the Latinos, and 2 innocent, I think, Latinos were killed in this movie. So it's people of color who were suffering the most from this gang violence that is portrayed in the movie, right? In the movie Colors, and I think they were trying to portray that. This, as you notice, none of the violent acts are occurring in suburban white communities, although suburban white people were helped driving the violence because they were buying the coke, right? Which is they're the biggest customers.
Yep. And with customers, there's no business.
That's right. I know. I talk a lot about fentanyl, and I do realize that if people weren't using fentanyl, then China and the Mexican drug cartels wouldn't be getting anywhere selling it. They wouldn't be shipping it up north, but people are using it because they are addicted. But hey, the whole thing about the spray paint in the face, that's pretty unrealistic. And but the one of the things that I saw in there, and is consistent with what's going on, I had to talk about it, and that's the pagers. Now, back in the day, if you had a pager, there was only a certain number of people who had pagers, but dope dealers had pagers. They used their money to buy pagers, and the customer can beep them and send them a note, and they had whole codes and all that other stuff, and where they could go and buy their dope. That did happen, and I couldn't help think about that in relationship what happened with Hamas. I always wondered when the attack on Hezbollah, I'm sorry, Israel they sold all these. They somehow got into the supply chain of the Hezbollah terrorist group and sold them all these pagers, and the terrorist group embraced pagers because they saw cell phones as a threat, and they put little charges of explosives in all those pagers, and then let them go simultaneously. And I always wondered what happened to all those pagers from the 80s and 90s that the dope dealers carried. Well, they went to Hamas and they killed a bunch of them. Hey, I think we're going to get Scott back here. Are we getting you back, Scott?
And he's moving.
Yes. I had to move to right now I only have Wi-Fi throughout my house. So for some reason, after that power outage, I couldn't get back on. So now I'm using my cell phone.
Oh, okay. Well, I wanted to, so we saw High Top in the movie get beat up, and they put him right in front of an investigator, and he said, the High Top says, I need a doctor. I explained, no, that if you got beat up like that in county jail, he'd go right to the clinic, and after get treated, the investigator probably would talk to him the next day. He's not going to be sitting there in front of the investigator bleeding out and being pressured for information. So there's a lot of exaggeration here, and I think it purposely shows the cops in a negative light, in my opinion. because it's just unrealistic. Maybe it worked for the movie, but it just wasn't realistic. And but what I did talk about, and I wanted to add on, is the intelligence gathered in the jails is critical to solving crimes on the streets, right?
Oh yeah, a lot of our information we would get came from informants in the jail, and like we said earlier, the whole premise that that there's no snitches in the hood and everybody snitches, and especially like if you wanted to get on the phone, you would if you wanted to get on the phone, you would tell deputies say, well, why should I let you on the phone? And they'd give you something, and then the JIU, Jail Investigation Unit, which now there's actually an OSS unit at the jail, I believe. You'd get them all kinds of privileges, and they would tell you, what you wanted to know. But a lot of mistakes with young guys would be, the guy would tell them, yeah, this, and this, and they'd let them, use the phone or get extra food or whatever, and then it turns out it's BS information. So, as detectives, it was like, okay, well, you're telling me now, but if this doesn't, you wouldn't give them any break until it was actually true. So like if they said, oh, there's a gun hidden here, you go find the gun, then you'd give them, the payoff. So you get them out of jail or not refuse to file a case, but you wouldn't, you tell the DA that this is a dog, don't file it, or so they get out of jail. But, some guys, it was always like, hey, don't put them right back out on the street, because somebody's going to say, oh, how'd you get out of jail so fast? They caught you with a gun, right? So you'd make sure that they went to their prelim, and then you tell the DA that, hey, at the prelim, dismiss the charges or whatever. Put it on us.
So, in terms of gathering intel in jail and solving other people's crimes, it was not unusual to gather intel in the jail for LAPD murders and then pass that information on, which is what we see in the movie, right?
Right. Exactly.
And I think once we pass it on, though, we would just pass it on unless they were in our jurisdiction. Then we might go with them on the warrant, right? And we wanted to gather some gang intel, right?
Yeah.
There might, unless there was a joint reason to be with them. For the most part, we would pass the information on, verify it, and then they would use it for their search warrants and whatnot. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, that would be accurate. But we work. The funny thing is we worked with the feds far more than we worked with LAPD. At least where I work.
Well, I know if the feds were going to, the interesting thing about the feds, and I think we need to probably talk about it, if the feds are going to be effective in investigating gangs, they have to work with the locals, right? Because we have all of the information. They don't control, the wire, so to speak, meaning the intel, the phone system in the LA County jail system that's controlled by the sheriff's department. And they don't have the network of snitches that I guess either the sheriff's department, LAPD, or other police agencies and their gang units around the county, right? So they have to, if they want to make cases, they got to work with the locals, right?
Yeah, and we loved them because they had money.
Yeah. Yeah.
So overtime wasn't a problem.
Now, one of the scenes they show in here, and it's just unrealistic, and I have to call this out, is they had a disruption in the jail, of violence in the jail, and all the deputies come running up with their batons. I don't know if you remember seeing that scene, and I'm like,
yeah, we didn't have batons.
Yeah, not in the jails. Heck no.
No.
Those weren't allowed. Some of those guys would have their batons taken away from them and used against them, right? We just didn't use batons in the jail. At the time, we still allowed flashlights, and eventually that went away. I think we allowed SAPs when I first joined, but never batons. So there was, whoever's doing their, I bet you they had LAPD as technical advisors on this, because, if they had a sheriff's department guy, they said, no, what are you doing?
Yeah, you don't allow a weapon in the jail.
No, not like that. And so, and I did talk about when we already talked a little bit about when High Top got confronted by the gang investor. Now, the attitude of the gang investor in the jail was really good. Tell me something. I need to know, right? You know, you want help from me. Of course, he's holding back medical treatment, which is not true. We don't do that.
No,
But you know, hey, and we have an obligation to put them in a place where they're going to be safe too. So we're not going to throw them right back into a place where he got beat up. But you know, he might not tell them the truth about that. He might imply that they're going to do that to get information out of him, right?
right. I mean,
And-
you tell them a lot of things, and you know it would not come to pass.
Right. And you
'Cause
can
you
use
know-
you can use a ruse on a guy to get information out of him, right?
Oh yeah, we use it all the time. We used it all the time. But you know, if you work a place long enough, you get to know who all the players are. Like, for instance, you know who all the players are. You know all their gang names. You know who their mom is. You know who their grandmother is. And a lot of times it's like, hey, you know, when's the last time you talked to your grandma, or when's the last time you talked to your mom? Well, give me a little information. I'll get you on the phone at the jail. I'll get you on the phone. I'll give you 30 minutes on the phone, but normally you only get 5, or even 1 or 2, depending on how the deputy was, right?
Yeah.
So some deputies you get on the phone just to be jerks because they're brand new deputies and they don't know any better. They, you know, as soon as you get on the phone, 1 minute and they turn the phone off. You know, so I don't know. I some of the movie some of the street stuff is true, but then again, you know, it is Hollywood, so like the jail stuff, none of that. The guy's going to go get medical right off the bat. There's no, like you're saying, there's no waiting. And that's the problem, you know, is people watch these movies and they think, oh, they're true.
Yeah.
In a lot of, you know, different movies, and you're like, it's the farthest from the truth. And you know, this
Information taken from a guy under duress, meaning he needs medical treatment, ultimately can be proven to be useless, right? You know.
right, and then you end up getting sued anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is really just about, so this is and I do think, you know, although this kind of presents law enforcement that they're solving the problems to some degree in a positive light, you know, it's kind of a backhand, you know, there's underhanded degrading of law enforcement in the movie, you know, implying some sympathy for the gangsters because the law enforcement's being tough, like, because you know, Pac-Man's really not realistic as it relates to Crash, as it relates to most Crash officers, and also the leverage used by these gang officers, whether it's OSS or Crash, on these guys is not really accurate. Even the portrayal of some of how the officers conduct themselves day to day, it's just not realistic. And I think it just presents by the one guy where he says, "Hey, I'll get you medical treatment once you tell me something." That's just not true. It kind of shows him in a negative light. Looks like we lost Scott yet again. Boy, this is just being a tough show. Hey, Jerry, how you doing?
Doing
Hey,
okay.
Jerry, yeah, I'm having a tough time on this show. People keep dropping
there he is.
out.
Scott, there's Scott.
Scott is in and out.
I don't want to I just want to drop in and say hi. And this is Anima's last day in the United States. She leaves tomorrow, so she wanted to say hi.
Where are you going?
Back to Austria, back to Vienna.
Back to Austria. Oh, my wife and I were just in Scotland. We had a great time. It was a lot of fun. You know, I was telling the audience, we visited the city of Stirling, which is where William Wallace, you know, the Battle of Stirling Bridge, he fought the English and defeated the English. That was a great one.
I love that in the movie where they don't even have him at a bridge. They have him in a field. I'm like, it's a bridge battle.
I
It was
know.
a very decisive battle because they could only come across single file.
But we also visited the castle where they filmed parts of oh my God, now I'm forgetting it. Harry Potter. Harry Potter. Well, yeah, you know, we visited places where they filmed Outlander, the series Outlander.
Because there's that famous lock castle that was used in Highlander.
Yeah, we didn't. You know, there's so many castles in Scotland. You know, we didn't. You know, so you can't get to all of them. But we visited.
Yeah, there's no shortage in Ireland or Scotland.
Yeah. I mean, we visited some castles, and obviously in northern England, and then we went up to Edinburgh, and Glasgow, and we did a couple of day trips to visit places as well via the train. But hey, are you going to still participate in Pop Culture Minefield there, Anima? So, I mean,
Oh,
it's
of
just
course, she's part of. In fact, that's why I wanted to pop in and let people know that our Wednesday show is being bumped to Thursday, just so she can get back to Austria and join us.
I'll be traveling all day.
We'll be doing Silver Bullet on Thursday. And by the way,
Wait.
I'm curious. What?
So she's going to be traveling all Wednesday, and you think she would? And you think you are going to
she'll be
have
fine.
energy enough on Thursday for a show?
Yeah.
Listen, dude, I'll arrive at around 9 a.m. on Thursday, so I'll be home 10-ish. I can get in a nap, and the show is 10 p.m. my time. So
Yeah, I'm not much on quoting that little turd from Europe, but how dare you?
I think it's easier going there and operating than going there and then coming back. For me, it was the coming back thing. It took me several days to recover, but
it's depending on what direction with the clock you move. If you go against the clock, you're going to have problems. But I got a question for you, because Steve Edmund finally put his video out of the shooting from yesterday of that BLM member that slashed the cop and then wondered why she got deleted.
I watched a thing and I commented on Twitter on it. I don't know if you saw that, but
I did not see your comments. I'll go look for them because I was curious what you thought.
Well, so I was reading the Washington Post article, and the Washington Post article said, a officer shoots woman, because she was this huge 6'5" woman, shoots woman after she apparent or they use the squishy word like apparent or possibly slash the officer, and you can see in the video. So he's knocking on the door,
off of him.
It's dripping, it's pouring down off his face. It's just a welfare check. So he goes there by himself. Hey, are you okay? You okay? She opens the door at first and then shuts the door. And okay, well, I still got to check. And he's knocking on the door. And he's by himself. And she opens up and she comes out with a knife after him. And he retreats, drop the knife. And she keeps coming after him. He shoots. And I think he probably hits her, but she's now on top of him. He waited too long. And she's able
he
to
let
slash
that. There's
at him.
that 20-foot rule. There's a 20-foot rule for a reason, because that distance can be closed really quickly.
And she closed the distance, and I think even after getting hit, she was able to slash him.
Yeah, he popped her twice. He popped her twice before she closed the distance.
And he slapped right on the top of his forehead, so she got him pretty good because she was coming down like
how
this.
Bad
and you can
scalp wounds bleed.
Right, and he tried to he kind of used his gun hand to kind of knock it away, but then he got back on target, and she was still even though she'd probably been shot, she was still progressing towards him, and
It's
so
what
no,
you want,
I
Dad.
That's what a lot of people think, that is self-deletion by cop.
It sounds horrible, but
That's what some people are saying.
Maybe, and she might have had some mental illness. Unfortunately, you got two people on the show who experienced this, Scott and myself. Somebody came in our lobby and wanted to die by police intervention, shot a deputy, and Scott went out and saved the guy's life. So that's who my guest is today. I was the watch commander for that mess. It was my first night as a watch commander. I was still on probation. Fortunately, I had good people like Scott to take care of that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's absolutely justified. I'm shocked that anybody's even criticizing the shooting.
Well, come on, WAPO is notoriously leftist.
Well, just the way they
I don't even
it,
say
right?
liberal anymore. Liberal is a good thing for me, because like Keith is a big liberal. He's a what you call a blue dog Democrat,
right?
And that's why he and I get along so well, because deep in my heart, I'm still a Democrat. I just have stayed where I was, and everybody shifted the other way. And I'm like,
yes,
well, I'm sorry, you can't call me alt-right or whatever you want to call it. My dad was a Democrat. We left the party because we lost guys like Hubert Humphrey for these crazy lunatics that are in there now.
But, well, I think you see a lot of the vote shifting.
You got to be pro law enforcement.
Yeah.
It's crazy that the anti-law enforcement we're seeing in this country. And don't get me wrong, I know you and I've talked about this. There are problems in any organization. We had it in the military. I had it when I was a paramedic. There's some shitheels that I served with as a paramedic in Seattle. That I'm like, man, if I get wounded, just let me die. Don't fucking try to help me. I don't want your help. I'd rather die. But this movie, I do like this film. I remember seeing it in the theater.
Well, we were both working the streets at the time, or at least I was working the streets at the time when this was filmed. Scott hit the streets shortly thereafter, but worked many of the areas that are portrayed in the movie. Scott spent more time in those areas than I did. I did work some of those areas, which is why I brought Scott on. And you know, there's some aspects of this movie that are accurate with what we dealt with, and crack cocaine as the precursor for the violence, that's absolutely accurate. But we're, you know, just the way the policing between, you know, Pac-Man here and then Robert Duvall's character is completely different, and it's more consistent with Robert Duvall's character over time. So, so we got a chance to talk about that, but also drive-bys, and I'll bring up one since you're on, and we got 25 minutes left, and I did want to talk about.
Question here, though, Patrick. You have a question here from Ariel.
How long ago did police forces start using some form of protection on their upper torso? Armor. Well, I was issued body armor right in the academy, so that would have been 83. And I remember my dad was working Detroit, and they did not have vests. In fact, I think my family chipped in money and got my dad a vest, and he was working Detroit, and that would have been in the late 70s. So I don't think it became standard issue gear probably till the late 70s, early 80s for a lot of folks.
Because I know that Adam 12 tried to follow the standards of what was going on with law enforcement at the moment. And early in the series, you would see a unit being issued armor, but it was kept in their trunk and pulled out for when an incident took place.
I had some old timers that I worked with that didn't like wearing them, but they kept them in their trunk. And it wasn't mandated that you had to wear them, but there was a lot of peer pressure to wear. And we joke about the first vests that were issued. We call them a postage stamp because they really only covered, whatever the heart area and, maybe to the rib cage. They really didn't cover very much. And the more food you ate, the bigger you got, the less it covered.
The bigger you got.
So eventually we got wraparound vests. Because there were I don't want to say successful shootings, but shootings in which police officers were killed where they had vests on, but like it would go under the armpit and took out your descending order. There we had some things like that involving officers. So, but I would say late 70s, depending on the agency's early 80s, and then we got more effective vests. Probably I would say in the mid 80s that included wraparound and the plate that goes in the front, because you can still get hit with a big round and it could cause sufficient damage to kill you, but the plate that they put in helped to stop that if it was right in
exactly. Because I told people, I said, and I've explained to Anima, I said, you get hit by that round, you'll probably survive that round, but you're going to feel like somebody just hit you with a baseball bat, right square in the chest. You're going to feel it.
But it can still do some damage there that can cause life-threatening injuries, and the plates
any compression to the chest can kill you.
Yeah.
If your heart is expanding when you get compressed, good luck on that one. By the way, Scott, I'm a former paramedic as well as combat medic, and that's what I dealt with.
Oh wow!
I worked in Seattle. I got in the middle of a gunfight. There was a gunfight between. Okay. We had to transport a member of one gang. I won't say the name of it on the show. And when we got to the hospital, cops were waiting there. We had a cop on board with us. We get into the ER. It's Harborview Hospital in Seattle. And as we're escorting him to the back, members of the other gang were coming up the other way. And I remember one thing in particular, the first shot that fired, I immediately dropped to a duck crawl and disappeared around a corner. I grabbed my partner because he didn't know what to do. And I dragged him duck walking to an exit. And I got the hell out of there. I'm like, you do not want to be caught in the middle of this shootout. They don't know those guys can't fucking shoot.
What year was
honestly,
that?
That was 93, 94, right in that window.
Right in that window when all this stuff was going on.
Yeah.
Oh, gangs were starting to ramp up there, man. And
we shipped them up to Seattle from LA.
Exactly. Tacoma, especially Tacoma.
Yeah, Tacoma had a big problem. I hate Tacoma. Forgive me if you're in Tacoma. What a trashy city. I fucking hated that town.
Yeah, we always look down on it because I grew up in Washington State. We always look down at it as like the ghetto of Seattle back in the 60s and 70s, because Seattle was beautiful.
Oh, it's just gorgeous, dude. And I worked, my primary station up there was SeaTac. We had a station house and a little, I know it's funny, it was a motel, a 2-story motel. And we had a bottom room and we kept our ambulance parked out in front of there. Instead of building a station for us, that's what we had. There were hookers, and right across the street was a strip club. And the girls would come out and they would go, woo! And we'd go, woo! Right back at them, because we're paramedics, we're guys, most of us. Sorry, my cat.
Yeah, that's funny, Pat, is that we got a lot of information from the prostitutes working the gang areas.
Yeah, they want to be safe too. They want to be safe. And they trust the cops for the most part up there in Seattle, man. While I was up there, there was that infamous kidnapping of a baby from a hospital, if you guys remember that. And they were caught at the hotel our station was in, upstairs all the way at the end. Because we were there when the feds and the local boys showed up. And I'm like, oh shit, let's get back inside. Wait till we get the call. But man, oh man, I got to get going here. My cat is, I'm sorry guys, my cat, my baby girl. Yeah, Nix just wants to be held right now. So, but anyway, I'm glad you did this film today. I really am. Because I like this film that came out.
Yeah, well, it's consistent with what Scott experienced. I didn't work the ghetto area till, when did I go? 84. I guess I touched on some of this, but it was, a lot of that stuff was starting to calm down by the time I hit. Because after I left Carson, I went to a place where they waved at you with all their fingers. A nice suburban area, La Crescenta or Crescenta Valley, very nice, quiet place. Then I went down to Century Station, which was the Watson Florence area, then Compton. So I went right back into the frying pan. But it started quiet down. It started, it's late 90s, early 2000s. Things slowed down. It just wasn't as violent, and I mean, there still was stuff going on, but it just wasn't as bad as it was in the late 80s, early 90s. At least that's what my impression was.
Well, it's funny, Pat, is when we took over Compton, they were averaging like 140 to 150 gang homicides a year. So the first year we got it down to 60.
Yeah.
And one of the chiefs had an OSS meeting, and a chief came in and told us how we weren't doing our job, that the murder rate was too high. And we're like, we've cut it in half. And then even when we got it down to between 40 and 45 a year, the department still thought that was too many. And it's like, well, we can't be everywhere all at once. I mean, what do you want us to do? But, I smoked at the time. So at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, I would be smoking with the watch commander on the back porch of Compton Station. And you'd hear a couple gunshots and you're like, well, there's the morning shooting. And then around noon, the same thing. And then at night, the same thing. You're like, well, there's the 8 o'clock nightly shooting.
That's what I remember. Compton was like this 100,000 people lived in the area. So when Scott says 140,000 murders a year, 140 murders a year, that's huge. They were like in the top 10 nationally. That's how bad it was.
Most violent city.
And we cut them down to where they were, I think, in the like 50-ish or something like that. It was still bad in comparison to everybody else, but way better than it had been. And then they tried to get rid of us like multiple times, the sheriff's department, the city of Compton. But the citizens voted it down every single time because it was they were safer with the sheriff's department because we reduced those homicides. But yeah, Gary, thanks for dropping in, man. And
you bet. And by the way, I want to point out before I go, the reason why Adam 12 came out, the reason why Webb made that series was because the police had gotten a bit of a black eye during the 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
And he was trying to build their reputation back up. And what I'm disgusted by right now is the ramping up of trying to make the FBI look good by Hollywood. But they still shit on cops. And it pisses me off that they don't try to show the hard work that law enforcement does in these cities of trying to ramp violence down and to set up programs to help some of the inner city kids. And it's, you know, it's run by the police, and they act like all the cops are doing out there is going out there and shooting people, and that's not what's going on. And
well, the FBI has become more of an intelligence agency than a crime fighting agency.
They're scary to me, and
they need to go back to the roots.
Go back to fighting crime and stop investigating American citizens.
Yeah,
and DOJ is just an abuse for the left. We're trying to use the Batman comment. Well, if it wasn't for Batman gang cops being here, then they wouldn't be here. Well, no, what you're talking about is Michael Caine said it is escalation. That if you bring a knife to a fist fight, the next time they'll bring a knife. And if knife's not enough, then somebody brings a gun. And it just keeps escalating upward. But do you blame society wanting to fight these people for bringing what's necessary? No, you can't. And so their idea of what escalation is kind of a stupid excuse for letting crime get away with shit. You stop trying to escalate it. It's like, well, war is war. When you're fighting crime, it's a war. Yeah. And you have to be willing. The law enforcement, as well as citizens, have to be as well armed as the bad guys, whoever the bad guys are.
When you have that level of violence that we had in the 80s, early 90s with the crack cocaine epidemic, yes, we had.
Yeah, crack was like that. Yeah. That was crazy what happened here. And meth, almost did the same thing because right here where I'm at, the Ozarks. The Ozarks were the meth capital of the United States, but now you have gangs down in South America that can produce that shit cheaper and just ship it up here. So meth production decreased here in Missouri to almost nothing. But still, by the way, if you try to go buy cough syrup in a Walmart, you have to show IDs. Yeah, it's all locked up.
Well, yeah, they changed the precursors for meth, but just for your audience, so I think it was in 2022 we had 107,000 overdose deaths in the U.S. 70,000 and change were for fentanyl, and the rest of most of them were with methamphetamine. So they're both really bad stuff, right? And a lot of it's coming up from Mexico, from both of those drugs. So hey, I gotta address, since we only got 10 minutes left, there is one thing in the movie I have to talk about because it was a fundamental change in how the gangsters fought it out. And I think Scott could give us some insight. The walk-up, the last shooting we saw where the Latino gangs walked up on to pay back the black gangs for the shooting, they essentially walked up, right? And there was a change. You want to talk about what brought about, this was pressure from prison gangs to change how Latino street gangs in particular paid back. They moved away from drive-bys and went to walk-ups. You want to talk a little bit about that, Scott?
Well, it's kind of like politics, Pat. You start getting a bad light on you, you're going to do, look at nowadays, we have somebody running for president who all of a sudden realized that all the stuff that she promoted in the beginning is not popular. So now all of a sudden, all the views have changed. So the prison gangs mostly run the street gangs nowadays because everybody goes to prison at one point or another. And so you have to be able to toe the line, basically. So basically, when they do these drive-bys, and like I said earlier, half the time the neighbor gets shot and not the person that was the intended target. So the edict came down was stop doing drive-by shootings because it's really putting a lot of pressure on the street gang, which in turn puts a lot of pressure on the gang in prison. So MA basically runs the show in Southern California. And so basically the edict was start doing targeted killings. So if you know so-and-so, like for instance, I had a case, homicide calls me and says, hey, can you respond out here to Sentry's area? I was working Sentry at the time. And basically a gangster that they been trying to kill, they've basically followed him from his house to a Taco Bell drive-thru on Imperial Boulevard. And when he pulled up to the order window, they pulled up next to him and shot him. And unfortunately, again, didn't kill him. He got hit, but it killed the baby in the car seat in the back seat. So I knew who it was immediately as soon as I got there. Before I even saw who homicide said anything, I said, did they finally get, his name was Johnny. I go, did they finally get Johnny? And they're like, how do you know who it was him? I said, because that's his girlfriend's car. And they're like, oh, but they did a drive-by a couple years before. They didn't get him. They hopped the fence into his backyard to get him after this edict came out, but he wasn't there. So they ran away because his mom called the police. So they basically did a surveillance until he left the house and they could just target him without shooting up the whole neighborhood. So they started just doing targeting because it was bad optics to just light up, 4 or 5 houses as you do this drive-by.
Yeah, it brought pressure on their business end, and their business end was to sell dope and make money. Ultimately, I think they realized the violence was counterproductive to making money, and this whole gang piece and all that other stuff was, hey, let's stop the violence. And it's funny because if you look at the old gangster films, we got to stop these violence because it's bringing the heat on us, and we all got to get along, and they got to have their commission and all that other stuff. And when you're talking the Italian mafia, but the walk-up, so the edict came down from prisons, and the Mexican mafia and these other state prison inmates, the Black Gorilla family, the Aaron brother, whatever, they make money off the street gangs, so they don't want that disrupted. And so, hey, if you gotta take somebody out, get out of the car. That's why I call it a walk-up, and do a walk-up. In fact, I remember that terminology being used. You got to do a walk-up, so it's got to be targeted, it's got to be close, and you got to take them out. So anyways, we're coming to the end of our show here. We had some technical problems, but one of the things I did want to talk about, we saw Robert Duvall get killed in a shooting in which one of the guys under the influence, looks like an AK-47, and Duvall takes one right in the 10 ring, and he has a vest on. And I think it's important to talk about when you got an AK-47, that's going to go right through a vest. So that was pretty realistic. I don't know if I think there'd have been taken control of that group a lot quicker than what I saw on the scene, but that's just Hollywood. But that does happen, right? You can be wearing your vest and an AK or something like that, which is why they're dangerous. That's why we got to make sure these guns are not in the hands of gangsters. But an AK-47, I don't know as much about AR-15s. They would definitely go through a vest as well, right, Scott?
Yeah. Basically, the small AR-15 is a 22 caliber bullet. Basically, it's a 223 is what it's technically. So it's smaller and it travels faster than an AK-47, but it deflects. The whole purpose of the M16 and the AR-15. It's called an AR-15 because Armalite 15 was the first one to develop the semi-automatic version of the M16. They got the permission from Colt, who made the original M16. So the M16 is basically a round that it travels fast, can penetrate, but then it goes into the body and it ricochets all throughout the body. And the idea is if you shoot a person with it, they're going to live long enough where it's going to take 2 guys to pull them to safety. And now you've taken 3 people off the battlefield. To whereas the AK-47 is a very heavy bullet that travels it's a 7.62 round basically, which is a 308 to hunters, and travels fast and it's very powerful, but it'll blow right through a person. It doesn't. So when you hit them, they're usually dead if you hit them correctly. So it just takes one person off the battlefield instead of taking people rendering aid off the battlefield. So that's kind of the genius behind it. So an AK-47 can knock out a car. It can go in the engine block, where a 223 the bullet would disintegrate hitting something that hard. But through a vest, it'll go through a vest. But now there's vests with the trauma plates that are ceramic and stuff like that, where you can pretty much, I wouldn't say always stop an AK-47, or they're more built, I should say, for rifle rounds, which is a lot of, like, when I was in the Marine Corps, we didn't have vests that would stop. My son was got out, I don't know, 5 years ago, and his vest, combat vest, would stop most rifle rounds. I mean, you'd feel it. You'd be knocked out for a few days because of the trauma to the body, but you'd still survive. So,
but that's heavier plating that you're carrying too, right?
Oh yeah, much heavier plating, much thicker plating, ceramic and Kevlar, combination of both, stuff like that. So yeah, AK was a preference back then because you could get a Chinese-made AK-47 at your local Big Five for like $200.
Well, I got a question for you, Scott, and because I don't know anything about this, this is a real question: is ceramic plating better than protection than metal? I guess, yeah, because it's lighter, right? But go ahead, and what's your answer?
Well, yeah, it's lighter. Ceramics is lighter. That's why they came out with ceramic plating. They don't use metal. And then ceramic plating shatters. That's what takes the shock from the bullet, is when it hits the ceramic plate, it shatters, so it reduces the
energy
impact of the round. Whereas metal, you dent it and you would feel a lot more energy transfer from a metal than you would a ceramic plate that shatters.
Yeah, probably the better way to say it is, if you get in a car crash now, the car crushes. It kind of smooshes, right? The older cars are more rigid and steel, and they don't smush quite as much. So you absorb all the impact from the accident versus the car absorbing it. And you're talking the same dynamics versus a ceramic plate versus a metal plate, right?
Right. Yeah. Cars nowadays are all built with crumple zones.
Crumple zones. There you go.
So it reduces the impact and the force from the impact. It reduces it. So I think in the hopes of not, less traumatic injuries than you would normally sustain. So that's kind of the same principle with ceramic versus metal versus Kevlar. Kevlar pretty much does the same thing. It dissipates the force, but it also it shreds. It doesn't, like ceramic. But now they have, combo of Kevlar and ceramic. So I always say that Kevlar more or less catches the bullets, where ceramic basically shatters and dissipates the force.
Yeah,
the impact force.
They have the same dynamic with Kevlar to some degree, but it is more catching and distributing the force throughout the vast. And ceramic, it shatters and it catches most of that force. And but yeah, I'm glad I answered that question. So good movie, mostly true life in terms of what we see on the streets, particularly not in the jail. But actually, I thought it was a good movie. You said you've seen it several times. I probably only watched it a few times. This is maybe the third time that I've watched it. But I do like the fact that they do show the violence that was going on at the time, and that is probably the important piece of this movie as it relates to our culture and the context of the time in which the movie was made. You kind of agree with that? Yeah.
Yeah, and LAPD was always known to be a little more heavy-handed with people than the sheriff's department.
But we're more successful at putting them in prison for a long time, right?
Right. Right.
Yeah, two different strategies because LAPD generally wore uniforms the whole time. Our guys did a more softer approach, and I think that was more productive. And we had to fight to keep that, even as we got an LAPD sheriff, Jim McDonald. He didn't quite understand, just rigidity in thinking, I think, from LAPD. And they were always accused of being much more rigid than us, much more militaristic than us. I'm shocked that we are the people who are in the news all the time in comparison to LAPD. But I think that's because there's a goal to weaken the sheriff in LA County. But hey, we watched the movie Colors, released in 1988. I'm happy to be back from vacation. And I want to thank Scott for joining me today. I think we are at the end of the show. Martine, you can take it away. Scott, stick around for a quick debrief. And see you guys next week.
All right.